Well, welcome along to another episode of Sweet Tea and Coffee. I'm here with, as always, my host.
That's right.
Blake Russell, there he is. And this is episode 32. Last week, we brought you a police officer.
Yeah.
This week, we go to another area of government, and we're going to bring you an expert in all things criminal justice in the in that world. So stick around. We've got George Day in the house, and he's going to hang out with us for a few minutes. He is doing some really cool work in the area of ministry within criminal justice and teaches at SFA. And so we're going to get into some of his story on this episode. Okay, as I said, we've got George Day in the house, and the official title, I made sure that I clarified this before we came in, he's an assistant professor at SFA in the Department of Government. Is that right?
That's right.
Yes, that's so good. Yes,
That's a lot.
I nailed it. Which, interestingly enough, George was just telling us that normally, and a lot of universities, that's actually in the sociology and psychology department here at SFA. It is in the government area. But George, man, tell us a little bit about how you got to Nacogdoches, how you ended up where you are, obviously teaching what you're teaching, why that's interesting to you, and how you made your way here.
Well, I spent my first 5 years as a professor out of Sam Houston State, where I got my PhD.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I actually taught at a little school in Marshall called East Texas Baptist University.
Okay.
And it's a good school.
Yeah.
But they were going through some changes. They didn't offer tenure for faculty, didn't have a lot of research resources. And so I wanted to come to a slightly bigger school that offered tenure for faculty, had more resources for research.
Yeah.
I was tired of being the one criminologist in my program.
Yeah.
And so I said, and I knew some of the other faculty at SFA. They were friends of mine from SAM. And so I came here.
Okay, when would that have been? When did you move here?
Let's see, I got here in 2015.
2015. Okay. And when did you first check out the church? When did you come to Fredonia Hill for the first time?
I had been researching churches as soon as I got the job offer.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know if it's funny or not, but Fredonia Hill was one of the first websites I saw.
Okay.
And it was across the street from the house I was going to rent.
No kidding.
Because it was going to rent, I don't remember what this Pearl Street or whatever it is, right across the street from the church.
Okay.
So I said, well, that's convenient. And
Yeah.
we ended up not renting that house and ended up somewhere else. And then we moved here. We had one of our nieces living with us. And so we rent. I think this is the first church we visited. Then we went to a few other churches, ended up back here.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think I felt like Fredonia Hill was the place for us, even though, we had to try other churches.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So we were conveniently located right across the street from where you almost lived.
Right.
That's good. Well, cool. Okay, well, give us a little insight into, was working in the criminal justice world something that you wanted to do from a young age? Did that evolve? How did you get into this field?
It never occurred to me.
Really?
I had, at a high school, I had failed out of Florida State University.
Where are you from?
Did high school in Tallahassee. I'm a military brat, so I've been everywhere.
Okay.
My last semester of high school, I got to take a dual enrollment class at Florida State. So that was my first semester of college. And apparently, I didn't know this at the time, but apparently if you don't go to class, you can't pass.
I've learned that lesson.
Blake has a similar story. That's interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was at Florida State.
That was at Florida State. And so my parents, of course, said, well, we're not paying for this if you're not going to class.
Logical.
And then my mom kicked me out. Now, we argue about this. She will tell you that I moved out. I will tell you that she kicked me out.
And the compromise is somewhere like after she asked you to leave, you moved out somewhere.
Something like that.
Get your act together.
And in fact, I did it before I even graduated from high school.
Wow.
A couple of months before I graduated from high school, I was out on my own. And of course, failing at Florida State because I wasn't going to class, and joined the military.
Okay.
Because it was funny. because my dad at the time was the commander of the ROTC unit at Florida State.
Oh.
And so he could have helped me get a scholarship.
Right.
And been an officer in the Air Force. And all he told me was, with my grades and things, that I needed to agree to major in certain fields. And one of them was meteorology. And I was stubborn and I was in love, had a girlfriend. And so I had to get married. If I was going to get married, I had to have a good job. Couldn't just be some college student without a job.
Yeah.
So I joined the Air Force as an enlisted man and ended up being a weatherman in the Air Force anyway, as an enlisted person rather than an officer.
Wow.
And then broke up with the girl while I was in training.
So you're a former weatherman. Wow.
This is like all the things that I like.
Yeah, you're checking all Blake's boxes here.
Weather, military, it's all. I love
I'm
it.
telling you. Okay. So where does the story take us from there?
It takes me through, as I tell my students, 4 or 5 colleges.
Wow.
With some fairly bad GPAs. I dropped out of college 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
While going through the military, got out of the military. That's where I met my wife, Ellen, was while I was in the military.
Wow.
Out at Fort Hood, probably in one of those places we don't talk about at church.
Yeah.
And got out of the military because got out is not the right term. Thrown out is more like the term. I got fat and apparently couldn't lose the weight. And so the Air Force decided it was done with me.
Wow.
And so I got kicked out of the military. And then we were living in College Station when I got thrown out of the military.
Okay.
And tried different jobs. I was a typesetter for the Bryan College Station Eagle for a while. I was a secretary at Texas A&M.
Wow.
And then, one of those things, I'm like, well, gee, I don't know if I want to tell the church this on the podcast. While we were in College Station, I walked out on her. And she moved to Brownwood where her family was, and I stayed in College Station. I was working at the newspaper during the night. I was working at A&M during the day. And, I kept hearing this. And the funny thing is that we weren't going to church.
You weren't? Is that what you said?
We weren't going to church.
Okay.
But,
were you a Christian at that point? Nominal or just...
As my mom would say, I'd been baptized, but all I really got was wet.
Yeah,
right.
Interesting.
Certainly wasn't living like it. And despite that, I kept having this feeling during the day and just kind of when I wasn't doing anything as I'm trying to plan divorcing my second wife, I get this feeling about how God feels about divorce. And it started out as a small voice and it kept getting louder and louder and louder until I couldn't ignore it anymore and picked up the phone and called Ellen and asked her if I could come home. And the funny thing is her one condition, even though we hadn't gone to church our entire marriage at that point, her only condition for me coming home was that we had to start going to church.
Wow.
And so I moved to Brownwood to be with her, and we started out at Coggin Avenue Baptist Church there in Brownwood, Texas, and both got baptized again. Maybe this time we actually got baptized and not wet.
Wow.
Really started to pay attention to what the Bible said more than just that thing you do on Sunday.
Yeah.
And along the way, I needed a job, and I was working in a convenience store when I first got there as the graveyard shift. That was just super wonderful. And I wanted a better job, and so I went to the Texas Unemployment Center and hoping to get a better job. And they said, here, fill out this application, take it to this address. And I pull up at the address, and there's fence and barbed wire and inmates in orange jumpsuits. I'm like, apparently I should pay attention to these things.
Yeah.
So I got hired as a juvenile correctional officer there. And it's the first job in correction. I'd never even considered that kind of work.
Wow.
But over the course of several years, I found that I really liked that work. I liked working with the kids most of the time. And decided that I wanted to become a caseworker rather than just a correctional officer. I wanted to be a case manager. I wanted to help with rehab. So I said, well, I got to go to college. And again, went to Tarleton State, got up, drove an hour from Brownwood to that town Tarleton is in, Stephenville.
Yeah.
Go to class, come back from my 2:00 shift at the unit, work 8 hours, go home, do homework. And, it's one of the things I tell my students at SFA is no matter where you are at the university, none of you are going to be in college as long as I was to get my bachelor's degree.
That's right.
And, I had a horrible GPA to that point, and I graduated Tarleton top of my class with a 4.0.
Wow.
Because college meant something to me.
That's right. Yeah.
Of course, then I get offered my first job as a caseworker, and they tell me I have to take a pay cut. Because by the time I got there, I'd been working for TYC for about 6.5 years, had become a supervisor.
So you'd worked your way up, and then it was starting over.
Start back over. Yeah.
And this is the thing that I felt like I needed to be doing, was working with rehab with these kids, but, less money, and I don't want to do that. And so I said, well, I'm not doing that. What else can I do with this fancy degree? And they said, well, you can become an administrator. I was like, okay, does that pay well? I'll go do that. And we moved to Waco. And spent 2 years at the McLennan County State Juvenile Correctional Facility as a program administrator. Had a 64-bed dorm. I was responsible for everything that happened on that dorm. And 2 years of that, I was working 65, 70 hours a week while trying to get a master's degree.
Wow.
So that I could advance further. I realized I don't like this job as much as I thought I did.
Wow.
And correctional officers are really difficult to supervise. I tell my wife that, and I go, I'm really sorry I have to say this. She said, no, I understand. Because my wife is a retired correctional officer. And along the way, my mentor in grad school told me, he says, well, you're fairly intelligent. Why don't you get a PhD and teach? It's like, well, it's got to be better than this. So I ended up at Sam Houston State as a doctoral student.
Wow. Let me stop you right there. I want to go back to, I know I'm going like way back into the story. So we're going to pick up, you're pursuing your PhD at Sam Houston. That's what I want to pick up. But I want to go back to this moment where the one condition for picking things back up in your marriage is let's go to church. What's her side of that? Obviously, she's not sitting here to be able to tell us, doggone it, we should have.
I know.
But does she, like, why was that the thing for her? What had happened to her that made her go, this is going to be the one condition?
I mean, you have to ask her, but I think some of it was she moved to Brownwood to be with her family.
Yeah.
And, her family were churchgoers. She grew up, unlike me, she grew up in a Christian home.
Yeah.
And she felt like that was the thing missing in our marriage.
Wow.
Was God. And, she was the one that kind of decided if we were going to make it as a married couple, we had to have God in our life. And after my feelings and the little voice and I was like, okay, this makes sense now.
Yeah.
That's, man, I love that because from her perspective and from yours, you'd both kind of come to the same place that if this is going to work, it's got to be because we have to start over, and we have to start over with really this as the foundation, a relationship with the Lord as the foundation. But you both got there in such unique and different ways, but got to the same point. That's
right.
Really
well,
cool.
it's the only, it's because it's like any marriage, marriages work. And we've been married for 27 years now.
Yeah.
Without God as part of our marriage and the focus of our marriage,
Yeah.
I don't think we'd have made it this far.
Yeah. But how cool to be able, even for you to be able to look back on that point and go, I mean, even today, even 27 years later, to look back on that point and go, we built this entire thing on that moment where we decided this was going to be completely focused on the Lord, and look where that has brought us. I imagine that in the challenges you face even today, that kind of hangs in your memory going, okay, no, but even today we're going to keep committing things to the Lord. And I imagine that's really encouraging.
Well, we have to. And, when I have friends that are thinking about getting married, I usually tell them that story.
Yeah.
That you're not that wonderful, happy feeling, that love feeling that you have when you're dating, that doesn't always last. You
Right.
have to have something else that you and your wife are both fully committed to.
Yeah.
That when you're both committed to God, then you're not worrying about, well, my wife's not treating me this way, or my wife's
Wow,
not doing
that's
this.
Yeah.
If I'm focused on my relationship with God and she's focused on her relationship with God, then the relationship between the two of us takes care of itself.
Yeah.
because we're obeying that command to love your neighbor.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good, man. We could deep dive there, but it's cool too that moment really was the thing that kind of became the catalyst for even the career that you're in now, and how meaningful your work is in relation to the way that God is using you in the community. And that was the origin point of that was your marriage kind of coming back together. So, okay. So I interrupted us. There's so many cool little moments here, but, so you're at Sam and you're pursuing your PhD. Take us from there.
I mean, that was a few years. In fact, that was probably the first church I actually joined a choir in.
Come on.
Wow, really?
Out of insanity, because the first thing I asked the choir director was, "Hey, can I join the choir? By the way, I can't sing." He's like, "Come on, it's a small church. As long as you joyful noise."
That's right.
Get up there and smile.
That's what I keep saying. Blake still won't let me in.
So when I graduated from Sam, this was another one of these kind of neat. I don't know if it's a neat story, but it's in my last semester at Sam as I'm working on my dissertation. That's when you kind of start looking for a regular faculty job. And I had interviewed with a position for a university up in Michigan, which my wife was so grateful we didn't get. And then I got this interview at East Texas Baptist up in Marshall. And the interesting thing to tell you is Marshall is where she was living when we met.
Oh, really? Okay.
That she had been in Killeen near Fort Hood, visiting some friends while I was out doing what young people do on New Year's Eve, and we met at a honky tonk.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, we're going to move back to, she's going to move back to Marshall, and this is okay. And so I went and interviewed, and I said this wonderful feeling about it. And then 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from the dean of the department telling me that they had chosen somebody else. And I was so confused because I really felt like when I started spending time with the folks, I went to church with some of the folks the Sunday that I was there. I was like, this is the place. God's calling me to this Baptist university. And I was so confused and heartbroken when I got that phone call. And I remember sitting in the driveway of our house in my truck and just praying, God, it's like, I don't get it, Lord. Whatever you want to do, I'll go with it. But I thought I heard you say this place.
Yeah.
And I don't understand, and just laid it all out to God. A week later, the dean calls me back and tells me that the person they offered the job to had turned it down. And they offered me the job. We ended up in Marshall.
Wow.
Yeah. The funny thing I always think is funny is, of course, I left there without having finished my PhD yet. We call it leaving all but dissertation.
Yeah.
And Sam students sometimes have a reputation of leaving the program, getting a job, and then never finishing. So when I'm up in Michigan interviewing for the job, I'm like, okay, I know we have this reputation, so I'm going to tell all these folks, I'm going to make sure they know I'm going to finish.
Right.
Apparently, I made that point way too many times, because when I asked them why they didn't hire me, they said, we didn't think you were going to finish on time.
Because you overstated the point.
So I finished a semester earlier than I should have, than I had planned.
Wow.
And of course, I sent graduation invitations to all the faculty at that university.
Nice. Wow. That's awesome. That's funny. Okay. So then you end up at SFA and you're now teaching, and this is cool. I think sometimes maybe this isn't the case every time, where a professor is teaching from a field that they've been really deeply involved in from a non-academic perspective, right? So you've worked within the system, you understand the ins and outs, having lived it and breathed it, and now you get to teach it. I'm sure that's an interesting perspective to have as you teach.
Right. Well, it's fairly common in criminal justice.
Really?
We tend to hire, unless you're at a research university, we tend to hire people that have worked in the field, so that we can tell students what it's really like.
Yeah.
Because there's a big difference between what law enforcement and corrections is like in the textbooks.
Oh, imagine.
And what it's really like when you're walking a cell block or you're working with students.
Yeah.
And so we try very much to hire people that have worked in the field before.
Yeah.
For instance, my two colleagues now in the department, they are both former police officers. Until we had a retirement recently, we had 2 police officers and a former judge.
Wow.
And then me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because typically in academic world, that's not the case.
Right. And it just depends on the field. I mean, we're very in criminal justice, we're very practitioner focused, as opposed to some more academic disciplines, which is a good thing. It helps the students.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really great. Well, okay, so I want to jump to kind of our meetings and our interactions. And obviously, I've been here 10 years, and so knew you in church context, and but we really started working together when it came to this ministry called Angel Tree. And I mean, in our very, very, very first conversations about it, I knew a little bit about it, and really from just my interactions with Angel Tree, just loved the concept. But conceptual is basically as deep as it got for me. I'd never really participated in it. And you walk in my office and we sit down and spend a ton of time talking. And one of the things that becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly, anybody that spends any time with you, is that for you, the work that you do as an assistant professor, the passion that you have in that area is also the place where God has called you into ministry. And you do that in all sorts of ways. And that was one of the things that was interesting the first time we sat down, is you're telling me, in my mind, you love Angel Tree and all that Angel Tree does. And I want to just give a little Angel Tree shout out here. Maybe we'll put a link in the notes or something. Really, really, really cool ministry. We do something with Angel Tree every year where we're buying gifts for kiddos whose parents are incarcerated, just trying to keep that family bond during that period of incarceration together. And it's just a fantastic ministry. But one of the things I learned about you in that conversation was that's not the only way in which you're ministering in that area. Man, you were telling me about doing these adult education classes, driving to Henderson a few times a week. I mean, just God has called you all the way in that area of ministry. How did that happen? Because you're telling me your story is like, okay, about finding a job and, but at some point God gets a hold of this and goes, and this is also the place I'm going to send you to work. This is the place I'm calling you. How did that happen? And what does that look like now?
Well, that starts when I was at East Texas Baptist. I had, mostly by accident, met someone who had been on campus to meet with some other folks who happened to run a faith-based halfway house, a man named Emmett Guyon. And just because I was the criminal justice professor, they said, well, you need to meet him. And I sat down with Pastor Emmett for a while and ended up spending the whole afternoon with him and talking about his ministry. And he really got me started in prison ministry. I started by teaching Bible study classes one night a week at his halfway house, mentoring some of the men that were there. Now,
for those that don't know, what are we talking about when we talk about a halfway house? What's that ministry look like?
Well, a halfway house is typically a transition placement between prison and total freedom.
Okay.
So an inmate makes parole and they don't have a place to go,
right,
or they've been in prison for a really long time, and so they have a hard time adjusting to the outside world.
Got it.
And so they get placed in a halfway house, which is, halfway between prison and full total freedom.
Yeah.
For the program that Emmett ran, it was a faith-based program. Normally these are fairly secular. Some of them are run by the state or some sort of nonprofit. Ours was a faith-based program where every man that was in the house, they lived in the house, and then we'd help them find work. And then every night there was Bible study, and we had different volunteers every night that taught a Bible study class.
Wow.
And that's how Emmett got me started, was teaching one of his Bible study classes one night a week. Started from that. And then Emmett was going out to the Bradshaw unit in Henderson once a week, teaching, doing some Bible studies out there. And he invited me along one day. And I said, well, okay, I'll go with you. It seems like a thing to do. And then it became a weekly thing. Then it became, I'm occasionally taking over for him. And then at some point, the chaplain there at Bradshaw said he had somebody working with Prison Fellowship who had been teaching some of their marriage and parenting courses that had disappeared on him, that for whatever reason couldn't come out to the prison anymore. And the chaplain asked me to take that over. And that began my relationship with Prison Fellowship Ministries. And I spent, 6-7 years teaching marriage and parenting classes at the Bradshaw unit in Henderson. In fact, I did that up until COVID closed the prison.
Wow.
And through that relationship with prison ministry is how I became involved with Angel Tree.
Now, Prison Fellowship is the umbrella that Angel Tree is under, correct?
Right.
Is that right? Yeah. Wow.
And it's an amazing organization. In fact, I hope someday I get back involved with the regular ministry, since COVID has caused so many problems. I haven't had an actual prison ministry to go to every week, which is a little sad for me. At least I still have Angel Tree.
Yeah.
Wow. So then you spend, like you said, 6 or 7 years where you're not just teaching in the field. You're using it as an opportunity for ministry. What's that like? I mean, as you're spending time with inmates, as you're investing, like what kind of perspective does God have to give you in order to be effective in that area of ministry? I think it's a place that a lot of folks are scared of in a lot of ways. I think it's a place that we just I don't know, what's that all about? I mean, tell us about your perspective. What is ministry in that environment like?
I think for folks that aren't used to it, prison ministry, jail ministry can be a little scary.
Yeah.
Those places are loud. They do have a certain odor to them. And you're working with folks who have broken the law. Yeah. Most of them are nonviolent offenders, but you do run into violent offenders. Things happen while you're in a unit. You see things that you'd rather wish you hadn't seen. You occasionally have to, you end up seeing use of force incidents. You see offenders acting out. These things happen. You just have to be kind of prepared for it. But that is, as Emmett used to teach me, is that the prison environment is, he used to say that it was probably the next great, dang it, the word missed me. Revival will come out of the prisons.
Why is that? What did he see?
Well, because for an inmate, prison is the lowest place you can get. You think about, at least I think about, the Hebrews as they're wandering around the wilderness, or Israel, where they went through that cycle with, they would turn away from God, they'd get rock bottom, then they'd cry out to God for a judge. And they always seemed to have to hit rock bottom before they would call out to God. Well, inmates aren't that much different. Yeah. Their life has hit rock bottom. They're in prison either because they've been addicted to drugs and they've made bad decisions, or they've been involved with the wrong kind of people. They don't have the right social support network. And so they're making bad decisions. And now they're in one of the worst places imaginable, because prison, it's not three hot meals and a cot like some people think it is. They're awful places. And it's a place where you don't have a lot to do but contemplate your life choices and what's brought you to prison. And so there is a great opportunity there for the Word of God to get into the souls of these men and women in prison. And that's why we do prison ministry. I taught those marriage and parenting classes for a long time, and not every person in the class was a Christian. I taught a lot of Muslim inmates. I had one guy in a class one time, the one I always remember, was a recent convert to Christianity from Odinism, which at the time I didn't know people still worshipped him.
Yeah,
but this guy was an Odinist, became a Christian. And so they're not all there to hear the Word of God or God as we know Him to be, but I get a chance to teach them about Jesus. I get a chance to tell them about the love of God, give them a chance to tell them about what Jesus did for us. And they're all redeemable. I mean, Jesus says we're all redeemable. Yeah. And we can't turn away from these men because they've done something, that violates our laws. Because we've all done stuff to violate God's law. I look at the inmates and I go, but for the grace of God, there am I.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not, I have a PhD in criminal justice and I teach in this stuff. Like those men, I have a criminal record. I've been convicted of theft by check. I came within a hair of going to jail. I got lucky with the day I got arrested, I had the money to pay my fines. But had things fallen another way, I'd have been in jail.
Yeah.
And so I'm not that much different from those guys. Maybe my crime isn't as serious as some of those guys, but if God can redeem me, and I was a terrible person. I told you, that when we left College Station was because I walked out on my wife. But when I was in the military, I was that guy that went to the bars and specifically hunted down, or I guess that's a word, looked for married women to have relationships with. I mean, I was an awful person.
Yeah.
And if God can redeem me, he can redeem anybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
And these men in prison, women in prison, a lot of people, even believers like us, don't want to go in the prisons.
Yeah.
Don't want to help these folks. And they're just like we are.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they need the same help we do.
And I'm sure that's powerful. What a powerful word. I mean, I just immediately think of the story of the Good Samaritan and that turning away that we like to do, the ignoring. Like, it's not.
Yeah,
I'm not going to go. I'm not going to cross the road.
And you don't acknowledge that exists out there.
Yeah, and that sounds like exactly. We like to do that. We like to put things in neat and tidy categories as if we're not all the same.
Right.
Broken and ruined by sin and in need of redemption. Like, that's a story of every one of us, criminal record or not. And you have to have that kind of perspective, not just to do prison ministry, but wouldn't you say to do ministry in general? I mean, that's the story of humanity. That's why Jesus came, and we've got to be able to see people that way. I'm sure you have tons of stories. And I asked you about some stories earlier, and you kind of said, well, I'm not quite sure how many stories I can share. But as you think about 6 or 7 years, even more than that, of prison ministry, are there any stories that you can share that really just stick out, that have impacted you? I mean, that have stuck with you, whether they've challenged you, they've challenged your faith, whether you've just seen God work in incredible ways, or, just anything that just really in those years stands out to you that you can share with us?
I don't know about specific stories, but I think the thing that working with inmates has helped me the most with is understanding love your neighbor. Because when we went back to church, when we first moved to Brownwood, it was very much, I would look at the Bible as kind of this legalistic set of rules.
Right.
And was so concentrated on rules, and we got to do this, and we got to do that. And working with inmates, I've realized that it's not always easy, but Christianity's not that complicated. And just working with inmates over the years, I've realized that it's just about love God with everything that you are, and love your neighbor. And if you can just do those things, and then God says, everyone's my neighbor. And you watch inmates, I'm sure you've heard stories about prison, and prison is very racially segregated. You get the white inmates hang out with the other white inmates, and the black inmates hang out with the other black inmates, and so on and so forth, until you get to the faith-based dorms. And the faith-based dorms, you don't see that. You see the inmates of different races working together and helping each other. And it's amazing to watch these men who have done, some of them have done horrific things, getting around and praying with each other, and seeing one guy on the dorm crying because his family can't come for visitation, or, something bad has happened, and they come together the way you expect a church family to do.
Wow.
It's amazing.
And just seeing that over and over and over in the prisons. Yeah, we got, the so-called jailhouse conversion. I've had plenty of men in my classes where I'm like, yeah, they're just here to get the little certificate I give them, but there's enough. One of the things when I started working with the Texas Youth Commission that they told us was, if you could change the life of one kid out of 100, your career has been successful.
Yeah.
And I think of the same way as ministry. If I can bring just one person and show them the love of Jesus, I've done something.
Yeah.
I think you make that's a really good challenge, because I think, especially within the church world, I think we see a lot of just real overcomplication of the Christian life.
Yeah.
And I think what I hear you saying is that prison ministry has taught you, no, it's actually simple. Love God, love your neighbor. And living that way requires for you, take the step out the door. Everybody's your neighbor. Start somewhere. Start with the guy that's right in front of you. Start in the places where the Lord brings you, but don't overcomplicate it, And that's that's a really great challenge.
Yeah. That's a really good thought. That's sometimes harder to swallow.
Oh man. Yeah. We overcomplicate so often.
We all, because we're humans. Okay. And the sociologists tell us that we feel really comfortable when we have rules and we have boundaries.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sometimes where we fall into that trap of this makes us more comfortable. If I have a set of guidelines I can follow,
right,
then I know where I am and I know what I'm supposed to do. But we get lost in that sometimes and we forget. Yeah. It's all just reach out to the person in front of you. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what they believe. It doesn't matter what they've done. They are our neighbor.
Yeah.
Judge is nowhere near in our title.
Yeah.
Our title is to love our neighbor and do what we can for them.
That's so good, man. Well, I would love to get into some of the angel tree stuff just super, super quick. We've got just a couple minutes. But just, so people that have been around here probably obviously know we've been doing angel tree for the last several years, quite a while now. And it's kind of evolved and changed but a really, really, really special, ministry here. Give kind of like the elevator pitch for what angel tree is. And I always feel like I don't do a great job explaining it, but I love it. And, so give us just a quick, George is, if you don't know, so George is kind of the catalyst for all things angel tree for us. He's the one that said, hey, we need to be involved in this. This is a ministry that is impacting the kingdom, that is making a difference in our community. This is a huge deal. And man, I heard about it, got involved and love it. So give us just a quick, why are we doing angel tree? Why is it so important?
It is important because angel tree saves lives. And protects the community. In Texas, and it fluctuates, but our recidivism rate, the rate at which convicts go back to prison, hovers around 50%.
Wow.
That's half of every offender that makes parole is going to go back to prison.
Wow.
But as a criminologist, I know that if I can strengthen an inmate and strengthen his relationship with his family, I greatly reduce the odds of him going back to prison. At the same time, parents are important to kids.
Absolutely.
I mean, yes, a parent can be raised by a grandparent. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's wonderful that some kids have a grandparent that can come and step in. But mom and dad matter.
Yeah.
And if mom or dad is in prison, that child's odds of becoming a delinquent increase dramatically, unless we can build the bond and strengthen the bond between the parent and the child. And that's what angel tree does. It gives offenders a way to rebuild that relationship that's been damaged through incarceration. It gives the child a connection to the parent that they might not otherwise have. And so we do that we as the church, we buy Christmas gifts on behalf of an incarcerated parent. And so the gift doesn't come from us.
Right.
The gift comes from the incarcerated parent. We just play Santa Claus. We just do the delivery.
Right.
Which is a ton of fun.
Yes, it is.
It's such I love it. It's one of my favorite things.
But in doing so, we help heal that damage because that separation it damages that relationship. And if we can repair that relationship, a criminologist named Travis Hershey talks about how our bond to society is what keeps us out of prison, keeps us following the rules. And for offenders, one of his theory states that a person becomes an offender when that bond to society is weak or broken. And so we're repairing that bond through angel tree.
Wow.
To help keep them out of prison and improve their family relationships.
Wow. Well, we're just not too far away from having done our last angel tree gift drive. That'll be coming up again here in the next several months, getting closer to Christmas, but just such a powerful ministry, important. George, thank you so much for coming to hang out with us on our podcast. I learned some things today.
I did too. It was fantastic.
I thought I knew. I didn't know everything. So I love it. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks for diving into your story. And we've got more guests coming up in the next episodes of our podcast. Some exciting folks. I think we're going to get to hear from the principal of our academy coming up here pretty soon, Miss Teresa Allen. So that'll be coming. And as always, if you've got guests, if you've got some folks that you think would be really great to interview, to share their story, then let us know. Reach out via any of the ways that you want to reach out.
Yeah, we are dependent on you to give us some leads on, on some of these things.
That's right.
You know interesting people, and we want to know them too. So you can email us at stc@fredoniahill.org, or call or text or pull us aside in the hallway.
Yeah, nice tap on the shoulder. Yeah. Say hey.
We take all those submissions.
All right. Well, we will see you on the next episode. George, thanks, and we will talk to you guys soon. Adios.